Jay, get off your phone, we're live.
Hold on.
Hey.
The wife's texting me.
Oh, okay, never mind. Yeah, that's probably another one.
Happy wife, happy husband, get more PC parts. Oh. This table's been kind of screwed over the years. Thought I found my taxes. Ah! Whoa! Oh! Ah! With the amount of videos that we do now where we critique your guys' setup, I've seen a lot of wood desks that could use a little bit of refurbishment. So today we're gonna take the opportunity to kind of kill two birds with one stone, or two tables with one stain. We're gonna show you guys how easy it actually is and how inexpensive it can be to bring a ratty old table like this back to life. The all-new 5000D mid-tower airflow case from Corsair features an optimized front panel for maximum ventilation, while the integrated cable management and tempered glass side panel means you can show off more of your components and not your cable mess. To see the full list of specs and to learn more about the 5000D's flexible fan mounting options perfect for both air cooling and water cooling enthusiasts, follow the sponsored link in the description below. Okay, so there's a lot of different ways that you can actually refurbish I'm just gonna say desk. What I'm gonna show you here pretty much applies to true wood veneers and actual solid wood tables. In fact, that table I've used as a dining room desk for a long time at the other studio that had water dripped on it could actually be repaired in a very similar method what we're doing here. It required a little extra work to sand down where the water damage is, where it kind of swelled. But this is an IKEA, what's the? Carlby. Why can't I remember Carlby? It sounds like Carl's Jr. and you'd think I would remember that. But anyway, dang, that was it's very bass drum. This is an IKEA countertop, but it has a true wood veneer. What that means, there's about an 1/8 inch thick, or what is that, like 4 millimeters thick of real wood glued to particle board. So since this is real wood, this will apply. If it's like a veneer paper, that's not gonna work. That's a whole different subject. We're talking real wood tabletops or real wood veneers. You're gonna need some stuff to get the job done. First things first, you've gotta sand down all this. We've got stuff stuck to it. We've got adhesive stuck to it. We've got glue, who knows what. We've got burn marks here where off camera one day we were burning quarters and then we were spinning them on the table and had to touch them. It was a stupid game we came up with. There's a couple different ways you can do this in terms of sanding. Now I'm gonna be using a power orbital sander. This gets the job done really fast. You can do this with a wood block. The problem with the wood block is I've got a couple of different sanding grits here though. So I've got a 320 for a finishing grit and a 220 for the first grit. Now a lot of the woodworkers out there might be looking at this going, why aren't you starting with 120? Well, again, this is a thin wood veneer. I don't want to sand through it. If I go through the veneer, I'm screwed. So if this was a solid wood table, if you're dealing with real old school wood furniture, oak, walnut, pine, that does not have a veneer, you can go with a heavier grit to make quick work of it, and then pass it with 220, and then pass with 320, and you'll be smooth as a baby's ass. But because we're dealing with a veneer, we don't want to go all the way through. So starting with the 220, finishing with the 320, which should get the work done. Now, you could paint it if you wanted, and then seal it with a clear. The problem with painting, especially if it's a wood, desk surface, with you moving your keyboards and your mats, and if your desk is anything like mine, you've got Starbucks cups, and you got cans, and you got all the stuff that makes you look like this, then it's gonna start to show blemishes a lot quicker. So I'm choosing to stain it. Now the stain I'm using is it's by a company called Minwax. It's the exact same company I used when I did my custom ultimate game room at home, when I made that wood backing board for the TV. It's the exact same brand as that. And the reason why I like this brand is you can actually wipe it off within 15 minutes. Some stains are leave on for 6 hours. Ain't nobody got time for that around here. So I like to use the quick stuff. The only thing with this is it's not suitable for outdoors, and it's gonna obviously not hold up because it's not a weatherproof stain. So you're using it only on interior stuff that's not gonna be dealing with a ton of moisture. So this obviously wouldn't be good for anything if you're using kitchen countertops or whatever, those obviously need to be sealed because of the wetness that can happen on the surface. Stain is called stain for a reason. Unless you want brown hands for a long time after, I would recommend using gloves. Now here's the thing, if you want brown hands, do a nice even coat on your hands so they're all the same color. The other thing we've got here is just a bag of toallas de terry for wiping off the stain when we're done. And I chose to use one of these pads that you can use to apply the stain. This is a 10-inch stain applicator because the size of this table, if I were using a brush, would be kind of a pain in the butt. You can even attach a stick to it so that you can like mop it if you're doing like a wood floor, or you can just use it like this on the table. If you're gonna use a brush, it needs to be a brush designed for stain. Here's the thing, as you're applying stain to wood, it gets tacky. It will start pulling bristles right out of the brush and sticking to the table. And trust me when I say that's not what you want, because if you have to sand those bristles off, there goes your stain and you're starting all over again. If you had used the right stuff to begin with, then you wouldn't have that problem. Oh, yeah, and because you're dealing with stain and stuff, and you don't want to destroy your beautiful JayzTwoCents merch with our new design actually coming out later this month. Go to JayzTwoCents.com so you don't miss it. Yeah, and if you hate those little segues, blame Linus. He's the one that frontiered this entire segue crap. So now that I've got on my old grimy clothes, or just known as my clothes because I spend all my money on cars, not clothes, let's go ahead and get started. So a couple of other things you need to just be prepared other than all this stuff is proper ventilation. We have the door open to our alleyway right here, and we have a fan that's gonna point down, Phil, the fans. There's the fan. We got a van that's gonna, We got a van that's gonna bring candy to the neighborhood. No, we got a van that's going to pull the fumes out of the studio because the fumes from this is terrible. We've also got N95 masks. You probably have some sort of mask by now. You don't want to breathe the wood vapors because that's terrible. So the N95 will stop 95% of all particles. And if you care about your vision, all right, so we're gonna start here with the 100 and, or the 220 grit. I keep saying 180, 180 or 120, which is where I would start with, really bad wood. If you hear a compressor, there is a power washer going on in the alley. We got the door open for ventilation reasons, as I already said. So I'm gonna put on my N95, I'm gonna start with the 220, and I'm just gonna sand this until all of these ugly things that are on the surface. If you look right here too, Phil, if you get in close, there's a lot of gouges right here. This kind of stuff, depending on how deep it is, may not come out. I mean, with how deep that is, I'm worried that that might go all the way through the veneer. I'm not gonna sand down to that level. You have to decide from whatever piece of wood it is that you're refurbishing, how deep you wanna go with your wood. This particular sander that I'm using too has these holes. So the pad that I got had these holes as well. The reason for that is this has a collection bag that will collect a lot of the dust. But as you can see by looking at the outside, it clearly doesn't get all of it. So that's why we still are gonna use the N95. And then we're gonna probably go through 2, maybe 3 of these 220 pads. So enough talking, let's start. Ow. Ow, sanding. And one other thing worth mentioning before we get started here, we're doing this inside a giant warehouse, and yes, we're gonna be covering a lot of stuff in here with sawdust. If you could get your item outside, it'd be preferred to do that. That way you don't have to deal with the mess inside and a really angry wife. What I have to combat this mess is a helper with a vacuum. So as I'm going here, it's already feeling really smooth. As you sand it smooth, you're gonna start seeing the dents and the gouges and things appear. This is the kind of stuff that if I truly cared and was gonna leave this as like a work surface that like I wanted to look pretty for a computer desk or something, I would fill this in with the sandable and stainable stain to make it nice and smooth, or I would just cover it with a desk mat like everyone does these days. But what I wanted to point out right now is you'll notice in this video that I'm doing like horizontal, well this is vertical, and horizontal sanding. You want to sand with the grain, but when you sand against the grain, you get more of a bite, you can cut it down faster, and then you go with the grain to make it nice and smooth. So this is something you're just gonna rinse and repeat. Keep an eye on your pad as it starts, or the sanding, what is that, sandpaper? As that starts to get clogged, this is not wet sanding, you just replace it. Don't worry about trying to clean it out, just replace it with a brand new one, or you'll be sitting here for hours getting nothing done, because as it becomes more clogged, it becomes more fine, and then you're not doing nearly as much. So let's keep going. So these lines right here, we've used the 220, we're on the 320 now. You can't feel them with your finger, but if you can see them in the grain like this, because they're cut across the grain, you're gonna be able to see it when the stain's gonna bring that out. What I wanna show you right now is even with a thin veneer like this, especially with solid wood, you could do this. You can take the sandpaper, hold the sander, and this is why I like orbital sanders. They do so much of the labor for you. This would really suck with a block. We got those lines all over the table. Here, this one's actually, here, we'll use this one. That one's really easy to see because it's against a darker grain. Can't really feel it with your finger, but it's there. But you can take the edge of the sander with a fine grit, you can literally erase it. So what I've also created with there is a little bit of a dip. The only problem with doing that method is you do lose some height there. But you know, one of the things about natural wood is unless you're putting these pieces through a planer and you're getting them perfectly flat, real wood furniture, old wood furniture especially, has imperfections in it. So that's something to keep in mind. And then what I'll do is I'll just, because there is a bit of a dip here, I can feel it with my finger, you can't really see it with your eye, is because I was going really hard in that area, I'll now feather that dip into the rest of the table. So now it's not nearly as obvious. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna work out some of these big scratches going across the table. This is usually from when I'm cutting cardboard, on our cardboard experiments with a blade. I'm gonna work out some of those lines, then we're gonna clean off the sawdust and we'll get to the staining part. All right, so all the sanding is done. I've gotten out all the deep scratches that I wanted. Again, this table has been through hell. You guys saw the montage. I'm not going for perfection here. Now this is the second time we've done this to this table, so that's why I also didn't press my luck with trying to get out some of these gouges and scratches, because again, if I go through this 1/8" veneer and I get to the particle board underneath, then it's just gonna look terrible no matter what, because that's particle board and not a grain or a nice grain wood. So as you can see, we've got sawdust everywhere, and I've got this little pressure output CompuCleaner.com thing. Like, you can see all the dust everywhere. This doesn't do anything to it. A little bit comes off the surface, but again, you don't want to stain with all that on there. So what you're going to do is you're going to take one of those terry towels I showed you we got. You're going to get it damp, not wet, just lightly damp. You don't want to get the wood too wet. And then you're just going to wipe in one direction, not the band, the motion, and you're just going to wipe off as much of the dust as you can. Now, the last time we did this on camera, I showed you guys how you could use a hack with Goo Gone and just re-oil the table using Goo Gone and call it a day. Because there's different methods here that people will use for, that's a little bit rougher than I want it to be right there. Oh well, that's fine. There's a bunch of different methods you could do to make wood look nice. If you just want to leave it with the natural grain, then you just oil it, keep it hydrated. But we're going to be staining this veneer for the first time. And you can see how fast the wood is actually drying with the damp towel. That's why you don't want it to be super wet, because as you go to stain this, you don't want to be mixing it with water. So again, the idea here is we're just getting all the sawdust off. Don't forget the edges, because we are doing the edges as well. And I'm wiping one way. That way we're at least moving it all to one side of the table if we're not getting it all on the cloth. Then we can rinse, repeat, literally with the cloth, and get all the sawdust out. What's gonna happen here is a lot of the sawdust is gonna settle down inside the grain. That's what's kind of happening here. So you see as I go over it, there's still white left. You might have to push harder to get all the sawdust out of the grain, because if there's sawdust in the grain, that sort of defeats the purpose, considering that's where the stain needs to go. So the gloves that I got here are powder free. A lot of the times they'll put powder on these gloves, that way they're easier to get on and off. You don't want any of that powder getting in the stain or anything like that. So glove up. You know, there's this whole thing about working on cars. You're not macho if you wear gloves when working on cars. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. But this is not about being macho with working on with the stain. Like I said, this will stain your hands. You do not want that. That's why I said, do it outside if you can, or use proper ventilation. Wear gloves, wear old clothes, and all my clothes are old, like I said, so everything's fine there. Be careful with the can. Have you ever noticed at the hardware store, there's a lot of cans that have drips on them and they're brand new? Don't just be like, and start shaking it, because you might literally stain the inside of your home or yourself. This can, fortunately, is all dry, so we shouldn't have a problem there. Mix it up well, because it can settle at the bottom, because this is oil. I am going to place the can on some paper towels, because once I pour it, I don't want to get it everywhere. Now you might be wondering, Jay, where are you going to pour that? On the table. We're just going to start working it in. So you're just gonna work it around. Doesn't take a lot of stain. You'd be surprised. A lot of people over stain quite a bit. They put it on too heavy. Now here's the thing. If you're gonna start using terry cloths, like we're gonna show you here in a second, to wipe it off after about 15 minutes, throw them away outside, put them in an approved metal container or something. The oils that are contained in these stains quite literally are a spontaneous combustion hazard. So don't just throw them in your trash can in your garage or anything like that. You'd be surprised. I don't know what it is about some people that don't work in the woodworking industry. They just say, no, that spontaneous combustion doesn't happen. Come on, just don't take the chance. It can and it does happen. These are very volatile fumes and oils. You do not want to be that statistic. So you're gonna see me going round and round and round to continue to apply. That's because it's actually being absorbed into the wood. And I'm sort of helping it make its way into the grains. The dark spots you're seeing, that's where the veneer is thin, believe it or not, and that's where it's getting near that backing layer. So it's kind of a neat looking grain, I think. Again, work surface, not a desk surface, so I'm not about perfection here. But if this were real wood, I would have probably taken the top to a wood shop and asked them to plane it and just cut the top layer off and then saved all that time. But I'm just continuing to work it in where you can see the stain start to, not bubble, but it starts to turn light. That's where air is kind of making its way out from the table. The table is also extremely dry because it's never had stain on it. So I'm just continuing to rub it in. And in about 15 minutes or so, is when we'll start wiping it off with those terry cloths. And it will take a lot of those cloths to get it wiped off, especially one this size. So that's why we got that big bag of them. The table is definitely gonna show its age, and look, all the scratches came out, like I said, because look at all these scratches. You know, at the end of the day, it's gonna be hard to make this table look good because of just the amount of abuse it's taken. Look at this, you can tell every box I've ever cut has been like that. Oh well. The process is the same regardless if it's an old beat up table like this or not. Now if I wanted, I could sand this down even more and risk going through the veneer. Because this is a workshop top, I am not the least bit concerned about that. But if you guys were working with real wood, then you'd be able to get all of these scratch marks and stuff out, and it wouldn't look bad at all. Now the funny thing is, I actually kind of like the way this table looks with all of these gouges and stuff in it, because each one of these gouges tells a story. And we showed you some of those already. And I wouldn't have it any other way, honestly. I could replace this top. So you just continue to wipe until you get as much of the stain off as you possibly can. And then you follow the instructions for your particular stain on how long you leave it on, how long before it's considered dry, how long before you can apply other coats. All the stains are different. You don't want to just take it upon yourself to do it a certain way. So this is what happens when you tell your wife what you're doing that day at work. She says, oh, if you're staining stuff, why don't you take my cutting board and my little leaf and stain that while you're at it?
In that voice?
Exactly that voice. Look how well, see what it did to the grain on this? This was just a solid piece of pine. And you can see how well that turned out. This is the exact same stain. When it doesn't look like my crappy table, it can actually look really good. All right, sound off down below if you guys have done any sort of woodwork restoration on your computer setups. And if you've got any setups that you want to submit to our React series, then get those pictures ready. We'll be doing that pretty soon, and maybe we'll feature some of your wood desk setups. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one as I continue to rub my wood.